Good afternoon and welcome to this joint webinar organized by the Faculty of Food and Agriculture at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, and the Archdiocese Ministry for Migrants and Refugees of the Archdiocese of Port of Spain. We express our sincere gratitude to all those who have contributed to make this webinar possible. My name is Leela Ramdeen. I'm the chair of the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, CCSJ, and AMMR, and an attorney at law. I am your chair for this event. You can read my bio and those of our panelists in the program on the link in the chat. And I shall read a summary of each person's bio, and you can read the more detailed bios via the link in the chat. Thank you for taking the time to join us today as we address the important topical issue of food security and environmental impacts. I would like to invite Dr. Mark Woodivera, Dean of the Faculty of Food and Agriculture at UWI, to bring some welcome remarks. He's a member of the Editorial Board and Management Committee of Tropical Agriculture Trinidad Journal and an Associate Editor of the Journal of Plant Nutrition and Soil Science published by Wiley. He has served as a reviewer for several international high-impact journals. He has completed several research projects and has written and contributed 108 academic publications, 44 of which have appeared in refereed journals. Dr. Woodivera holds membership and has been involved in the activities of several professional bodies. He has served as visiting scientist and lecturer and academic visitor to several high-profile universities and research institutes. Dr. Woodivera's teaching and research covers multidisciplinary areas, for example, soil science, soil physics, irrigation and drainage technology, environmental science, and sustainable land use. Please, Dr. Woodivera.
Thank you very much, Chair Ms. Leela Ramdeen, Attorney at Law, and Chair, Catholic Commission for Social Justice, Archdiocese Ministry for Migrants and Refugees, Dr. the Most Reverend Charles Jason Gordon, Archbishop of Port of Spain, who is represented here by our able Chair, Ms. Ramdeen, distinguished panelists, Mr. Ansari Hussain, Executive Director of CADI, Mr. Ruben Robertson, FAO Representative Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname, Dr. Lena Demwo, Biodiversity Specialist at the Ministry of Planning and Development, Mr. Daryl Rampasad, President, Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago, Professor Judith Gobin, Head, Department of Life Sciences, UWI St. Augustine, Dr. Ladana Kanhai, Lecturer, Department of Life Sciences, University of the West Indies, Dr. Giles Eudoxie, Deputy Dean, Outreach and Internationalization, Faculty of Food and Agriculture, UWI St. Augustine, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to the webinar on food security and environmental impacts. If there is any topic of contemporary importance, it must be food security and environmental impact. This is more so for the Caribbean region, which is known to be highly vulnerable to the vagaries of food security or food insecurity and climate change impacts. This webinar, as you would have heard from our chair, is jointly hosted by the Faculty of Food and Agriculture and Catholic Commission for Social Justice. And this webinar has a slate of expert panelists carefully selected for their wealth of experience, expertise, knowledge, and wisdom that will help us in this discourse as we seek ways to navigate the rough waters of mounting food insecurity and environmental degradation. The availability, accessibility, utilization, and stability of foods to meet food and dietary needs in a secure and sustainable environment are critical for the sustainable development of any region, particularly of a region like ours. Food and nutrition security in the Caribbean has, however, been challenged by natural disasters, over exploitation of natural resources, volatility in the prices of food and agricultural inputs, barriers to intra-regional trade, outdated technologies, high incidence of pests and diseases, climate change, and a lack of an enabling environment to foster institutional partnership and agri-food innovation. Concurrently, our region's food supply is precariously dependent on high volumes of imported food and soaring unsustainable import bills. The prevailing global pandemic and the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict have exacerbated these issues, with food and input supply chains on the brink. Therefore, this is not just another scientific discourse, but a call for partnership among governments, policymakers, producers, academia, entrepreneurs, business people, financiers, diplomats, and civil society as we seek approaches of building sustainable and resilient agri-food systems in a safe and secure Caribbean environment. Our collaboration in this great effort is of the utmost importance. From our experience, it is only through to tackle the enormous task before us of building sustainable and resilient agri-food system in a safe and secure Caribbean environment. Our collaboration in this great effort is of the utmost importance. From our experience, it is only through multi-stakeholder collaboration that we can truly accelerate progress and make a dent in the food insecurity and environmental issues that challenge us. Furthermore, focusing on scientific inventions, innovations, and technological solutions using a food system approach will allow us to make huge strides toward the results we seek during this difficult time. In this context, this webinar will discuss issues related but not limited to capacity building, sustainability, agricultural production, biodiversity, pollination, marine resources, seafood, plastic pollution, food and nutrition security, and climate resilience, amongst others. The Faculty of Food and Agriculture emanated from the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture, founded in 1921, which later became the precursor of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. The Faculty of Food and Agriculture therefore celebrates 100 years of agricultural excellence exemplified through teaching, research, innovation, and outreach. This 100 years, my friends, have been years of human resource development, capacity building, building communities, and building a sustainable future for all. The centenary highlights and celebrates the legacy we have crafted while charting our way to another bountiful 100 years of teaching, learning, and research in agriculture and agriculture-related disciplines. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Faculty of Food and Agriculture and Catholic Commission for Social Justice, Archdiocese's Ministry for Migrants and Refugees, I welcome you to this webinar. I am confident that you will find new ideas, fresh energy, and novel impetus to fire regional and national efforts towards developing a food system that is modern, strong, and resilient for food and nutrition security in a safe and secure Caribbean environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood de Vera, for your kind words of welcome. So I would now like to read a message from the Most Reverend Charles Jason Gordon, Archbishop of Port of Spain, who is unable to be with us today. He is a former lecturer in Caribbean history, social ethics, media, Caribbean theology at the Seminary of St. John Vianney and Uganda Martyrs. He's currently the principal of the Caribbean School for Catholic Communications in Trinidad and the vice president of the Antilles Episcopal Conference of Bishops. He's also the chair of the conference's Evangelization Commission. He was appointed Archbishop-elect of Port of Spain in October 2017 by Pope Francis and was installed on December 27, 2017 at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, Port of Spain. In his message to us today, he says, and I quote, "I extend a warm welcome to everyone. This webinar is taking place during what in the Catholic Church is called Laudato Si Week. The theme this year is listening and journeying together. The week runs from the 22nd to the 29th of May, during which time we are called to continue to pray and work to achieve integral ecology. This year marks the 7th anniversary of Pope Francis's landmark encyclical Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home, which is addressed to every person living on the planet. Pope Francis calls upon the Church and the world to acknowledge the urgency of our environmental challenges and to join him in embarking on a new journey to integral ecology. Integral ecology sees not only the interconnectedness that exists between God, humanity, and creation, but also the interconnectedness with environmental, economic, political, social, cultural, and ethical issues. The issue of food security and environmental impacts, therefore, must be seen within a wider context and must take into consideration the common good, that is, the good of each person and of every dimension of the person. Human dignity is the foundation of a moral vision for society, and food security is the foundation of human dignity. In his message to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization in 2021, Pope Francis warned of global food insecurity and called for support for small producers to help them improve their capacities and resilience. He assured the FAO of the Church's support in fighting hunger and its causes. He said, "Conflicts, extreme weather events, economic crises, together with current health crisis, are a source of famine and hunger for millions of people. Therefore, in order to address these growing vulnerabilities, it is essential to adopt policies capable of tackling the structural causes that give rise to them, to provide a solution to those needs. It is important, above all, to ensure that food systems are resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and able to provide healthy and affordable diets for all." He stressed the need to develop a circular economy which guarantees resources for all, including future generations, and promotes the use of renewable energies. The fundamental factor for recovering from the crisis that is striking us is an economy tailored to humankind, not subject only to profit, but anchored in the common good, friendly to ethics and respectful of the environment. The reconstruction of post-pandemic economies offers us the opportunity to reverse the course followed so far and invest in a global food system capable of withstanding future crises. This includes the promotion of sustainable and diversified agriculture that takes into account the valuable role of family farming and rural communities. Indeed, it is paradoxical to note that it is precisely those who produce food that suffer from the lack of scarcity of food. He noted that most of the world's poor live in rural areas and depend primarily on agriculture for their livelihood. Due to lack of access to markets, land ownership, financial resources, infrastructure, and technologies, these brothers and sisters of ours are the most vulnerable to food insecurity, said Pope Francis. He said it's not enough merely to outline programs. Tangible gestures are needed that have as their point of reference the common belonging to the human family and the fostering of fraternity. This webinar is taking place at a critical time in our country, says Archbishop. I thank the Faculty of Food and Agriculture at UWI St. Augustine for jointly hosting this important initiative with CCSJ MMR and offer my blessings to all panelists and participants for a successful event. It is only through such collaboration that together we will be able to develop and implement mechanisms to promote food security in our country, in our region, and in the world. I thank you. End of his message. So I would like to move now to the presentations by panelists. I remind panelists that each of you has 10 minutes to deliver your remarks. And at the end of the presentations, we'll have a question and answer segment. And because of our tight time constraints, I shall read extracts from the bios of the panelists, and you can read their full bios in the chat. Please note that during the presentation, you can write questions in the chat, and panelists will seek to address these during the Q&A segment. So I invite Mr. Ansari Hussain to address the topic, CARICOM's food crisis, improving capacity to sustainably feed the region. Mr. Hussain is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, CARDI. He has been working at the Institute for more than 18 years. He has served the Institute in various other capacities, not only in TNT, but in a number of other Caribbean countries. Over the years, Mr. Hussain has managed and implemented several research and developmental projects aimed to further the development of value chains for commodities such as cassava and sweet potato, hot peppers, small ruminants, and coconuts, and represented the Institute on various committees, conferences, and other high-level meetings at the national, regional, and international level. He's also the author and co-author of more than 30 publications. He sits on the board of directors of the Caribbean Agricultural Commercial Services Hub Limited, and he's presently pursuing a PhD in livestock science. Mr. Ansari, thank you for agreeing to participate in our webinar. I invite you now to make your 10-minute presentation. Mr. Hussain.
Thank you again. Good afternoon, everyone. My topic this afternoon is on CARICOM's food crisis. I will be addressing matters relating to improving the capacity to sustainably feed the region. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I will give an overview of the state of food insecurity in the region, outline some of the threats and impacts, and I will give an overview of where are we now in this process of addressing food insecurity. So this slide really shows you the state of food insecurity in the region. CARICOM imports approximately $6 billion worth of food annually. With the exception of Belize and Guyana, CARICOM countries are net food importers, with at least 7 of our countries in the region importing more than 80% of the food consumed. In 2020, we had about 16% of the population being undernourished, with roughly 41% of the population experiencing moderate or severe food insecurity. And this is based on data from a recent report, it compiled by the World Food Program, IDB, FAO, and so on. Obesity, in terms of obesity and NCDs in the region, we had roughly about 7.5% of children under 5 years was found to be overweight in 2020, and this is about 2% higher than the world average. So we are not in an ideal place, a good place. This slide shows you the average imports of food and agriculture products in the region between 2001 to 2019. And looking at the graph, you can see quickly what are some of the high imports. We have meat and edible offal. We have dairy products, cereals, animals or vegetable fats, beverages, spirits and wines, and so on. The next slide shows you for 2020 grouping. CARICOM Secretariat would have grouped the importation according to selected food groups. And again, you see where meat products, fish and fish products, milk products, cereals, vegetables, fruits and fruit juices are some of the high ticket, the big ticket items that we need to address in terms of the import bill. We have some threats affecting threats to Caribbean food security. We all know the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has really put a spotlight on the state of agriculture and food production in the region. Climate change is a problem also affecting, and when we speak about climate change, we're not only talking about the frequency and intensity of storms and so on. We speak about droughts, we speak about erosion, saltwater intrusion. Environmental degradation is also a problem with regard to food and nutrition security. We have an aging farming population. We have socioeconomic factors will also affect the state of agriculture and food security in the region, and of course the wars. Right now we have, everyone will know about the war between Russia and Ukraine, and that too would have caused increases in shortages in commodities like wheat. You would have disruption in supplies of fertilizers and so on. In terms of the impacts, these threats will have severe impacts on persons in the region. We have increase in hunger, high unemployment, persons would have lost jobs, have reduced income. It would have disrupted value chains, especially where we have, because we import so much food, any disruption to shipping will have negative consequences on the region. Shortfall in food availability. Well, obviously you will know if you have reduced supply, market price, and high demand, market prices will go up. The inability to access food, that links back to the person's ability to earn income. And you also have breakdown of production, processing, and traceability systems. This slide shows you over many years the various plans that would have been developed to address this issue, this matter of food security in the region. Some plans would have gained some traction, some plans never took off. The current plan that have gained center of attention right now is the 25 by 2025 plan, which aims to reduce the food import bill by 25% by the year 2025. And this was really a call by the Prime Minister Mia Mottley out of Barbados. If I recall correctly, this was when she would have been the chairman of CARICOM around 2019, 2020, somewhere around there. And she would have given a call to reduce the food import bill by 25% by 2025. The CPSO, the Caribbean Private Sector Organization, this is an organization that was established just around that time. They responded to the call and they proposed an increased role of the private sector in addressing this matter. Obviously, if we are to increase production and productivity, we can't do it. We can't do it without the private sector. The private sector have to be involved because there must be commercial production of the various commodities. The CPSO plan, the developer plan, they focused on 7 priority commodities. We have poultry and meat, hatch and eggs, animal feed, vegetables, cassava, and coconut products, and of course, leveraging the distribution networks to ensure markets are accessible. The priority commodities targeted the displacement of roughly a little over $400 million worth of extra regional imports, and this would have been based on 2018 data. Now, following that, we had in 2021, just giving you a little background on what happened over the years. The Conference of Heads of Government approved the establishment of a special ministerial task force to address this issue. The MTF now, the ministerial task force, identified similar commodities like the CPSO, and they would have spoken to the CPSO and have come to an agreement in terms of what are the commodities that we need to address. And these are poultry, corn, soybean, and rice for feed, meat, niche vegetables, herbs and spices, meats and tubers, and this goes on. There were several cross-cutting issues identified, and these related to transportation, land, access to land, insurance, processing facilities, agro-processing facilities, finance, the availability of credit facilities, and the collection of reliable and accurate data and management and informed decision making. So where are we now? Most of you should know that last week there was a Agri-Investment Forum and Expo hosted by the government of Guyana and the CARICOM Secretariat. And out of that meeting, we had the CARICOM Heads of Government identified 4 priority areas that will be addressed urgently. Following that session last week, there's another session, a follow-up forum being planned for sometime in mid-August to be hosted in Trinidad and Tobago on this same matter. And at that forum, obviously, there will be updates with regard to these 4 urgent issues as an outcome of the last week's series of meetings. So the first one is the food insecurity implementation of the same agricultural plan I just spoke about, the ministerial task force. The ministerial task force is headed by the Minister of Agriculture for Guyana. Guyana being the country that has lead responsibility for agriculture and food security in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet. And that's why you see a major role being played by Guyana in this regional agriculture development plan. In terms of regional transportation, one of the big issues is regional transportation. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, she will work together with a team to complete a proposal for establishing an adequate and sustainable regional transportation system. And this is to be presented at the heads of government in July 2022. The issue of trade barriers, which if you go into these regional meetings and so on, this is a hot topic. You will always have, you have countries complaining about the accessibility of markets in other countries. Is a burning issue, and it read its head again last week, and a special committee has been set up to address this matter of trade barriers. The deadline for limiting such trade barriers is third quarter of 2022. In terms of including...
Sorry, just to give you a heads up, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, great. Women and youth. CARICOM to commission study on ways to attract and expand the participation of women and youth in agriculture by 20%. And this is also due to quarter of 2022. So 2 minutes quickly. How is CARI involved in addressing some of these issues? I will not go into CARI's entire work program. I'll just highlight some major areas. We work in development of commodity value chains. We focus on a series of commodities: hot peppers, sweet potato, cassava, coconuts. We work in other areas as well, but these are some of our priority commodities. We have done, recall that we are the CARICOM institution responsible for agriculture research and development. So a lot of our work is based on research, it's based in research and development. We did a lot of work on evaluation of varieties, development of varieties in terms of tolerance to heat, flooding and whatnot. We have seed banks in terms of genetic conservation to conserve the germplasms across the region. We have seed banks, and we did a lot of work on improving tisciculture capacity in terms of capacity building of different tisciculture labs throughout the region. We also do a lot of promotion of good agricultural practices, integrated pest management, integrated disease management, and we also work in renewable energy to address to counteract this issue of less reliance on fossil fuels. Thank you. That's it for me for now. Hope we could get some questions so we can go into more details. Thanks.
Yes, sorry. So I now invite, thank you so much, Mr. Hussein. I now invite Mr. Reuben Hamilton Robertson, Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, representative for Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname, to address the topic food and nutrition security. Mr. Robertson is a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and has been with FAO since 2004. He commenced duties at the FAO Country Office in Port of Spain in December 2018. Within the UN Caribbean team, he represents the FAO in the Regional Steering Committee for the Multi-Country Sustainable Development Framework and is the current chair of the UN's Emergency Technical Team, Trinidad and Tobago. He's a member of the FAO's Technical Network on Family Farming, Rural Development, and Rural Youth Employment. He's completing PhD studies in biodiversity, vulnerability, and adaptation to climate change with the University of Guyana. Thanks for agreeing to participate in our webinar, and I invite you now to make your presentation, Mr. Robertson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And let me congratulate and at the same time thank the University of the West Indies and the Catholic Commission for Social Justice for partnering to host this very important webinar on food and nutrition security. It's very timely, and I would like to assure you that FAO is fully supportive of this initiative in the sense that food is a fundamental human right. And food is too important a business to be left to one institution. So I have listened to the two presentations so far by Dr. Didine Wadi Vera and by my colleague, Executive Director of CARI. And most of the issues overlap. And I would like to say that most of what I'm going to say fall within the same realm but I would like to take a little different slant in my approach to food and nutrition security. So I would like to first of all give an outline that this presentation has 5 parts, and the importance, a definition, the pillars, the actions that are being taken, some consideration on healthy diets and their cost, and the conclusion. And why am I taking this approach? I need us to focus on the definition of food and nutrition security. Because we have been, as Ansari said a while ago, we have been on this journey for decades to ensure that this region, which is highly dependent on export, is self-sufficient. The self-sufficiency we are looking for is to ensure that all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious. This is the point I would like to emphasize. Nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food performance for an active, healthy lifestyle. I need us to focus on this definition because some of the things that I would like to say will come back to this definition. Now we have 4 pillars that comprise the food and nutrition security. Mention was made about availability, access, utilization, and sustainability. And also mention was made about some of the challenges that we face. So for example, in the region, our food is made available through some domestic production and food imports. And our high levels of food imports, primarily the processed foods, contribute to some significant challenges. These foods are much cheaper, but they are higher in terms of sugar, salt, fat, contributing significantly to the high levels of NCDs. Even our own domestic food production, we have been focusing on foods that meet our needs and not necessarily nutritious foods that meet our dietary needs, our nutritious and dietary needs. Our production systems continue to be fragmented and are not linked to healthy diets. When we look at accessibility, in most of our countries, we still face problems of fiscal rigidity in terms of high debt to GDP ratios, where it makes it difficult for the countries to expend money on food and other development and investment in agriculture to make food more readily accessible. And then the impacts of COVID highly exacerbated the situation through disruptions of value chains, unemployment, high food prices. My colleague mentioned about the Ukraine war, which is contributing to high prices. And this in itself is projected to increase to more than 40% for not only food prices, but input prices. But the question is asked about, for years we have been focusing on food security, food and nutrition security. But are we in a position to have food that is affordable, healthy food, healthy diets? What is the cost of this food? In the Caribbean, you will see in my future slides, what is the current situation. Utilization, we still have a lot of challenges in that we are still in the primary production mode. And the way we utilize food in terms of our bad habits for food utilization and consumption, the weak institutional support for taking this food to another level to make it more convenient and easily used by our consumers is still a challenge. And then the sustainability factors made about impacts of climate change and on the food systems, and the absence of good agricultural practices across the spectrum, low productivity, land and soil degradation, loss of biodiversity, aging farming population. These are some of the challenges that affect food and nutrition security in terms of sustainability. So what are some of the actions? Some of the actions mentioned by my colleague again, and also by the Dean, where we have CARICOM response, most recently with the 25 by 2025. I will not go through that since there was a detailed presentation on that. Then we have the OECS, which is a sub-regional program for addressing agriculture transformation. And then the countries themselves have their development plans to address not only the COVID response, but for agriculture development and transformation. The national plan of action at the country level to ensure that these countries achieve the 2030 agenda and leaving no one behind. So FAO, as an international best practice organization, has been working with this region for decades, and we have been able to prioritize our work with the countries to ensure food and nutrition security for healthy diets, food safety, building resilience to climate change, natural resources management, strengthening of value chains, mobilization of resources for investment in the sector, capacity building and institutional strengthening in the areas of policy and legislation, and strengthening of partnerships. FAO, through the technical assistance, have been able to work with countries and continue to work with countries to ensure 4 strategic objectives. One is better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. We do this through what we refer to as the enablers. Ensure that the relevant, reliable, and timely data are available for evidence-based decision-making, strengthening of the production systems using innovation technology, strengthening of partnerships, we mentioned before resource mobilization, and ensuring gender equality and inclusiveness in the agricultural sector. Now, it is very imperative that we look at what have we been doing for years. We have been producing food locally, bringing in food through imports to feed our nations, but we have been focusing on food and not so much the nutritional content of the food that we provide to our populace.
Mr. Robinson,
And so our emphasis now, hello?
you have 1 minute left.
Oh my, our emphasis now is on healthy diets. And how do we make healthy diets available to our populace? And not only that, but at what cost? So the Caribbean region is considered to be the highest cost region for a healthy diet. And you see it there in the slide. Not only that, but the Caribbean region, in terms of cost per meal, healthy diet, across the spectrum of countries, we see here in this graph that some countries like Grenada, Jamaica, Suriname have some of the highest costs, Suriname being one of the leading producers of food in the region, but the cost of a healthy diet is still tremendous. And then here we have countries, let's assume we have 63% of the total income per person in these countries spent on food. Here we have, in these countries, even though they use 63% of their income to buy food, they are not able to provide for their families a healthy diet. And the countries are there in the slide to show that. So in conclusion, we are pressed to transform our agri-food system to make them more resilient, equitable and inclusive, and sustainable. But most importantly, I would like to focus on the data that will allow us for informed decision making. And I have this on my slide here, the type of data which we know we not now capture that will help us to address the issue of this high cost of healthy diets. Things like the food insecurity efficiency scale, the per capita food consumption, our household budgetary surveys, our average daily food expenditure, and the quantification in the National Food-Based Dietary Guidelines and the composition of food data. So we have a lot of work to do. Although we have been providing support to the countries, our partners, and us, we need to be able to work together to not only just focus on making food available, but making healthy diets available at affordable cost to our population. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robertson. I now invite Dr. Lena Dempwolf to address the topic Managing Pollinators for Sustainable Agricultural Production. Dr. Dempwolf currently serves as a biodiversity specialist at the Environmental Policy and Planning Division of the Ministry of Planning and Development of Trinidad and Tobago. She's a pollination ecologist and ecosystem services specialist whose past research focused on the identification, assessment, and valuation of pollination services in neotropical and agricultural landscapes. As a technical researcher for the project for the Ecosystem Services team, she led the accounting for pollination services in the Nariva region of Trinidad and Tobago. She has also worked at the Global Water Partnership Caribbean as a program officer supporting the Water, Climate and Development Program and supported a number of projects in TNT. Dr. Dempwolf, we thank you for agreeing to participate in this webinar and invite you now to make your 10-minute presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can you see my screen? Is everything okay in
Yes.
that area?
Yes.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you very much. So, hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about some more nitty-gritty stuff. So we're going to be talking about managing pollinators for sustainable agricultural production today. Sure. Right. So today's discussion for us is basically just a quick reminder of what pollination is, why pollination matters to food production, and how you can improve pollinator and pollination management specifically for agricultural production. So we're going to talk about some pollination basics, and you're going to see lots of pictures of bees in my slides. So first of all, what animals contribute to pollination? You are aware mostly that that bees are pollinators, and possibly about butterflies or bats and so on, and birds maybe. But there are quite a few other animals that actually contribute to pollination, and those include monkeys, marsupials, lemurs, bears, rabbits, deer, rodents, wasps, and flies are very good at that. Also things like ants, butterflies, and moths, and so on. So there's quite a variety of animals out there that actually contribute to pollination. And even lizards pollinate some plants. So honeybees, I really need to mention this. Honeybees are great for honey production, but it's sort of, they're not the main animal that is involved in pollination, especially in this part of the world. For us, it's an introduced species, and it was brought here for the purpose of honey production. So they're not the greatest pollinators for our biodiversity, and they shouldn't receive the most amount of attention for the conservation either. So wild pollinators are actually far more important for pollinating our plants that we have locally here. And while bees do their job, or while the honeybees do their jobs, and they are very good at what they do in the parts of the world where they originate from, those are not the ones that we should really be focusing our main conservation efforts on. And so this is just a slide that I always stick in just to show a little bit of the diversity of bees. A lot of them don't look like bees. You might mistake them for something else. But these are all bees that I found in Trinidad and Tobago. We also kind of need to talk a little bit about other animals. So aquatic pollinators actually also exist, and they make a contribution to seagrass pollination. And there has been evidence in the past, most of the research has been conducted in the areas of Mexico, in the waters of Mexico. And there's evidence that the crustaceans actually contribute to the pollination of seagrasses around there. Seagrasses provide a number of ecosystem services, and I'm sure we're going to hear about some of that later on. And they're feeding grounds for many species, they're nursery grounds, They provide wave attenuation and coastal erosion protection. So that's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening for the seagrasses there, and pollinators are also responsible for maintaining these. And if we're talking about factors for successful pollination, what has to happen is that sufficient pollen has to be transferred from the male part of the plant, which is the anther, to the female part of the plant, which is the stigma. And this has to happen while the pollen is still viable. So while the pollen is still active and can still fertilize the female components. And usually that's actually quite a small time window, and it could just be a few hours a day. And this implies that the pollinator has to carry a large number of pollen grains at the same time to be able to do this. The pollen that is collected has to be deposited while it's still viable, so while it can still fertilize the ovary and ovule. And the pollen cannot be modified during transport. So a lot of bees, especially those that are social, they tend to chew the pollen grains and stick them on their legs. Those are no good for pollination. They're great for the bees for food, but they are not useful for pollination. So it's the other pollen grains that get stuck on the bees on the outside that are more useful for pollination. The pollinator has to visit flowers of the same species in sequence. It's no good if a cucumber pollen grain ends up on a squash. And the pollinators possess physiological features that allow them to transport these pollen grains. So having very hairy bodies, being able to fly, those are some of the things. And they have to be able to travel the distance required between the plants. So ants might be useful for plants that grow very close together, but they're not going to be particularly useful for pollinating tree species that grow far apart, for example. So why should any of this matter? And why should it matter to food production? Depending on where you look and what sources you have, you're going to get slightly different numbers for this, but generally more than 90% of the 250,000 species of modern flowering plants and more than 65% of all plant species are pollinated by animals. So pollinators maintain our biodiversity in many ways, and they also provide us with food. There's been an ongoing global pollination crisis where we're having a loss of these wild pollinators. And the problem is also we just don't have the data. We don't know what species we're losing. There's a lot of research going on now, but there's still very little in the Caribbean region in particular. And a large portion of the crop value that we have is actually due to pollination, but it's not recognized. So if pollinators were to disappear, you would get a lot lower yields as a consequence. And a lot of places have sort of taken to hand pollination, but that is not nearly as effective as animal pollination. The bees and the birds and everybody else are still a lot better at it than we are. And you still get higher quality fruit from animal pollination than you will ever get from human hand pollination. There's generally a global shift to animal pollinated crops. So people actually plant far more crops that require animal pollination than they ever did before. And because you have a growing population and there's a growing demand for the crops and for the food, and you have the shift to planting more animal pollinated crops, you have a greater strain on these pollinators. You're requiring more of the pollinators to pollinate your plants to get the food, but humans have to constantly take more of their habitats to be able to grow the food. So this is becoming a very difficult situation. It can not only result in a food shortage, but it can also result in a nutrition shortage, mostly because a lot of the animal pollinated crops are crops that produce specific micronutrients. For example, lots of vitamin A crops are animal pollinated. So you can actually have a problem of a nutrition shortage. And animal pollination increases yield and fruit quality. So it's not only that you get more, but it's also that the fruits that you're getting is of a higher quality. So the more of the pollination that you have, the better the fruit that you're getting at the end of the day. And the intricate thing there is that there are a large number of threats from the agricultural sector. So this here is just to kind of illustrate very quickly. This is from local research where you have a huge reduction in yield in crops as a consequence of the complete absence of pollinators. And how to improve pollinator and pollinator management. So first of all, it's always important to note that high pollinator biodiversity means high biodiversity in general. Pollinators pollinate plants, plants in turn provide habitat, food, and so on for other animals. Those animals then obviously reproduce and so on. So you have everything sort of built on this pyramid of pollinators, and these pollinators underpin all of biodiversity. And their diversity themselves also supports agriculture in a very big way. So the obvious thing would be to address the threats to the pollinators. And the initial things are things like herbicides and pesticides. We have a number of issues with that, especially in the Caribbean, because you have lots of overuse of pesticides, and that is a real challenge. Habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, a general lack of legal protection in the Caribbean policies or management plans. There's a lack of knowledge and just data and awareness. We just don't have the information to be able to support the policies. The honeybees themselves can actually negatively affect the native pollinators by bullying away the local pollinators and taking their resources. And climate change is always a big issue.
Dr. Dempo, you have
1 minute. Sure. Other threats to pollinators include land use intensification, alien species, and diseases. So there are quite a few issues that pollinators face overall. And the things that you would need to do for this in general, or what you can do, is you can reduce or eliminate pesticides, including herbicides. If you do need to spray, you can spray a targeted area or targeted species, and only spray when you need to, and only do this in the evenings and in low wind conditions. You can use alternative pest control methods. You can intercrop. You can engage in crop rotation. Maintaining trees and wildflowers are very useful. Reducing and eliminating tillage is a very good way, because over 70% of the bees are ground nesting. And every time that you till the soil, you're destroying a lot of the bees that are actually nesting in the soil. You can keep a portion of your land unplanted for habitat. You can keep stingless bees. We have those in several Caribbean countries, the Meliponian bees. Leave logs and leaves on the ground for habitat and for nesting, and just generally reduce the cutting and the trimming of other vegetation, because that serves as habitat as well. I just want to mention very quickly that we have our Pollination Project ongoing. It's the BestNet TT project. It's a 2-year project. And we are focusing on improving pollinator and pollination conservation and management. It's being implemented by EPPD and UNDP. And there's several ways to connect with us on various social media accounts. And you can email us or just give me a shout if you have any questions or would like to be involved in some way. And yeah, so as Gary Larson says there very nicely, know your insects. That's the first step. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dempo. And I would like to invite Mr. Dario Rampasad now to address the topic world hunger. Mr. Rampasad, who is from the farming village called Vega de Oropuch, is the president of the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago. He's a crop farmer and agronomist by profession, and is also trained and specializes in artificial insemination and embryo transfer. He has worked in several agencies, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, the Sugarcane Feed Center in NAMDEVCO as a field officer, in Trinidad and Tobago Agribusiness Association as procurement manager and technical officer, as well as in Massey Distribution as a senior agronomist, and a few other leading chemical companies. Mr. Rampasad, we thank you for agreeing to participate in the webinar, and I invite you now to make your 10 minutes presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, Ms. Leela Ramdeen, and fellow panelists. I must say that the timing for such a webinar was excellent, and I am thoroughly enjoying the topics thus far, especially the person that presented before me on pollination. It was a very enjoyable one. Unfortunately, I've been having a very, very busy week, so I was unable to put together a presentation. But however, my topic deals with world hunger, right, and the existence of world hunger today. So briefly, I will speak on world hunger and as it pertains to food security at the same time too. One of the main causes of world hunger affecting people living in developing countries include climatic or environmental factors, as well as economic slowdowns, as you would see. These factors contribute to the challenges of sustainable agriculture to produce food. Besides poverty, climate change is the second leading cause of hunger, as I heard one of my fellow panelists discuss climate change before. And when we think about climate change, it is not just as it may pertain to the hot season or the dry season in Trinidad and Tobago. There are a lot of other factors that contribute to climate change, right? So mostly we would think about it as excessive rainfall or just the drought period, but there are a lot of other factors that contribute to climate change at the same time too. And which, as again mentioned, is the second leading cause of hunger and is making it harder for families in most vulnerable parts of the world, example, Haiti and Africa, just to name a few places, to grow enough food. Almost daily, we see that the frequent and intense weather events are destroying land, livestock, and crops. There are millions of suffering from the world hunger due to climate change and limited resources to adapt to climate change, and are vulnerable to extreme weather events such as flash floodings, drought, heat waves, as we are now seeing taking place in India especially. And again, hurricanes as it may hit. Environmental factors as it pertains to climate change also shows the effects it may have on the nutritional content of food produced. And being an agronomist, I would talk on that point also. Foods that are produced and that with insufficient water, you have a lower nutritional content, right? So whilst we may adapt to different water systems, in most cases, when we produce food with insufficient water to supply, what you would have in most cases, you would end up with deformed fruits and vegetables. You would end up with a lower nutritional value. And on the other hand, in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, besides the heat, when we produce foods with excessive water or in conditions of excessive water, what we'll experience is in terms of flash flooding could be one. And separate from that, you would experience your commodities having more fungal effect, mold and so on could be taking over your crops. According to statistics, 1 out of 9 persons may suffer from hunger, and it even exists right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Recently, the Agricultural Society and a few members of my team was doing an exercise in terms of research, in terms of poverty as it may exist in Trinidad and Tobago. And we came up with persons there, and after the statistics was put together, we have persons in Trinidad and Tobago, if you believe it or not, that still live on an income, a daily income of close to just $30 a day. Unbelievable, of just $30 a day. We have individuals that explain that they had to choose between purchasing a phone card for their children to go to school for online classing recently through the COVID, or instead of purchasing maybe flour and some beans to be able to feed their family for 1 week. And that is the reality that we are facing right now, whether we believe it or not. Economic constraints in certain countries is another reason why we suffer from world hunger. And again, as it pertains to refugees, in most cases, leaving their countries because of such issues as it may pertain to world hunger, again, because of economic crisis, availability to finance, and again, lack of resources for sustainable agricultural systems. According to statistics, each year, almost 1/3 of the food produced in Trinidad and Tobago also is lost due to drought or flooding conditions. In recent months, we have discussed upcoming projects aimed at eradicating world hunger, and especially right here in Trinidad and Tobago, eliminating poverty, targeting women, youths, and existing farmers in Trinidad and Tobago. One would include doing agriculture in small spaces, utilizing new technologies that we can now grow foods, that we can bring someone who is on an income of zero income to a more supportable income at the same time. Looking at small spaces, as we realize also that there are a lot of areas that are now turning into what we would like to call a concrete jungle. When we look around, you would see that there are areas that are being built up and there are not much areas designated at the same time for agriculture. And this is an issue that we are going to tackle in the near future, looking at doing agriculture in a small space. And at the same time, we are going to put into effect the each one teach one practice. So what we're going to do with the youths and women, especially unemployed women too that want to get into agriculture, is that when we complete such a course, we are going to revert to them and have them now teach the others in their community going forward. As it pertains to climate change, we are on a path to continuous introduction of new methods of farming with our existing farmers. For example, utilizing systems that use less water in areas such that will have drought, and at the same time, above ground planting methods for the areas that we would experience a lot of flash flooding. Also working alongside a few local companies, the Agriculture Society was able to do testing in new varieties that would require less care and less pesticides and so on. And the aim of also producing safe and healthy foods at the same time. We have also noticed that within the recent times, and again, my fellow panelists also touch on it, the issues that is taking place globally, which we cannot ignore. Ukraine is one. The pandemic continues in terms of COVID, that also continues. And what we are seeing is increasing food prices almost globally, and is a fact that we are not exempted from such. Whether we are purchasing these items directly from these countries, we are still purchasing from someone who is there. So at the same time, we have heard the topics in terms of wheat. In recent times, we have learned that there has also been a decrease in wheat production due to environmental factors. And in recent months, the Agriculture Society has also had a conversation with the Embassy of China to embark on a project to do the introduction of high-yielding forages, looking at a feed substitution program to take place within the next couple of months. This will also be aimed at targeting also our small ruminants farmers, poultry and livestock individuals. So we have also discussed doing a high protein legume that will add to the feed substitution project, and also creation of a new substrate from the said grass that is going to be produced there. Looking also at different commodities that we can now grow into Trinidad and Tobago, such as mushroom. Taking into consideration that our food import bill, right, also is made up of different items. When we talk about the food import bill in Trinidad and Tobago, in most cases, most people think it's about vegetables only, but our food import bill is made up of a lot of items that we do not produce here in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of items. Wheat especially is one of those that we need on a daily basis, right? So when we take into consideration the food bill, one of our main staples here in Trinidad and Tobago is rice. We consume rice almost every day. And the rice that is being produced here in Trinidad and Tobago sometimes is not of the quality of the ones that we are purchasing or importing at the same time. Taking that into consideration, that rice makes up a very big part of the food import bill, we have also engaged the Embassy of China to work alongside us to introduce new varieties of rice in the near future, and also to set up a rice mill where they will be purchasing back the same rice that is produced at the same time too. And all this is an effort of reduction of the food bill, import bill, and reduction of hunger at the same time.
Mr. Rampersad, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. Well, basically, I have covered most of the items that I want to speak about, and I want to thank you all for the opportunity for being here. Climate change affects the effects of climate change on the global food system in such a way that those who already suffer from hunger, we are the others who are here to help them. And we can't solve these issues in world hunger if we work alongside each other. And we discussed earlier removing bans and so on trade, right? These are some of the efforts that will help to eliminate such issues taking place to countries that are in more vulnerable positions or threat. In order to end hunger, we must deal with it first in our current situation of dealing with the issues of climate change, climate crisis as it pertains to climate change, and poverty. We all have our role to play as we work together to achieve food security for Trinidad and Tobago and for the rest of the region at the same time too. And I will close this statement as I always say, agriculture is the next oil field, right? And you would ask why. After that, we always have to eat. Food is the first trade that was known to mankind, and I believe that it will always be the last trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rampersad. I invite Professor Judith Gobin to address the topic, Sustainable Harvesting of Marine Resources, Seafood. Professor Gobin is an internationally recognized marine scientist with a career spanning more than 38 years. She has made significant contributions to the knowledge of marine biodiversity in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, with numerous publications on a number of new marine scientific records and new marine species. She's the first female professor in the life sciences at St. Augustine campus, the UWI. In 2018, she launched a book and a 5-part DVD series, Deep Sea Wonders, featuring footage, the first ever reveal of TT deep sea communities from an expedition by the exploration vessel EV Nautilus, on which she was the first TT marine scientist on board. Professor Govind has been making marine scientific interventions and continues to contribute globally to a number of key discussions on ocean conservation and the sustainable use of marine resources. She has worked at UAE as a lecturer for the past 22 years. Professor Govind, we thank you for agreeing to participate in our webinar, and I invite you now to make your 10-minute presentation.
Thank you very much to the Faculty of Food and Agriculture. Thank you very much, Chair, and to the CCSJ as well for the opportunity to contribute on this very important topic. In Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, a novel from 1951, which was actually set in the island of Cuba, his sailor in the novel muses, "Now is no time to think of what you do not have. Think of what you can do with what there is." 71 years later, this is still so very appropriate. Seafood is still a very small percentage of total food consumption in the world, even though 1 billion people globally rely on seafood, that is fish and shellfish, as either their main or sole source of protein. Slide 1, please. This situation is indeed grim. We continue to hear research comments done by scientists across the globe, as well as locally and regionally. There will be nothing virtually left to fish from the seas by the middle of the century if current trends continue. 1/3 of the sea fisheries have already collapsed, and the rate of decline is accelerating. The current state of the world's fisheries is therefore a matter of great concern, and more so for our islands like Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, by extension, the Caribbean. The global approach to these issues are reflected in the UN Sustainable Goals, which we have on the slide, at SDG 14, Life Below Water. At 14.4, it proposes that by 2020, and note that we're in 2022, and we have not, in fact, effectively regulated harvesting and ending, and that was what was proposed, overfishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and destructive fishing practices. 14.6 also continues about prohibiting certain forms of fisheries, again proposed for by 2020. 14.7 proposes by 2030 to increase the economic benefits to small islands. And of course, we are a small island, we have the resources that we really need to pay attention to, and our practices must continue to be sustainable. While it has begun, we have made a lot of approaches to achieving some of these goals. We certainly haven't gotten to where we wanted to by 2020, and certainly, well, we still have some time to 2030, so we can only hope. The stats continue, or rather the statistics continue to tell us that, of course, globally, the demand for fish continues. It has doubled over the last 40 years, and it is likely to continue to grow. We heard about growing population from one of the earlier speakers. And of course, it's the same in Trinidad. Lots more mouths to feed, and where are we going to get the food and the resources? Of the 35 million people currently involved in the fishing industry globally, 95% live in developing countries. And I think we heard from the Archbishop's talk earlier, it tends to be people of lesser means, fishing communities. They are small scale fishers. Their livelihoods depend totally, almost totally, on making sure that they have fish on their plates for tomorrow. Commercial landings account for approximately 90% of total landings in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have in Trinidad 80 landing sites, while in Tobago we have 20. And everyone is aware that there's a range of services provided by these landing sites, from simple storage to larger structures where boats and so on can be repaired. What is interesting, though, is out of more than 1,000 finfish species in the waters of Trinidad and Tobago, it's only a very small handful of species that are actually used, that we actually consume, that actually make up that commercial fishery that we in Trinidad and Tobago enjoy.
Sorry, Dr. Govind, can I interrupt? Can you just tell us when to put in?
I will.
Okay,
Thanks. I will. So we have this very large number, 1,000 finfish species, but really only a small percentage that are caught and landed and that are sold and that we eat. Other marine resources, of course, like shrimp, lobster, crabs, and so on, mussels and conchs, they are also included. That means, in effect, that there are more species in the sea that we can eat and therefore exploit. At the same time, though, almost 75% of our commercially important marine fish, many of these are being overfished and they have reached their biological limits. That means their limit of productivity and regeneration of the resource. In other words, we're in trouble. Some of the other factors that contribute to this state that we're at is the open access fishery that we have in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean and in a lot of other areas where it's really a free for all. You know, anyone can go out and fish, anyone can go out and use a trawler. You need to be registered at the same time, of course, but of course we know it really is more of an open access fishery. At the same time, financial incentives given often by governments, and it tends to encourage the development of the fishery sector, because what it means is we want to encourage people to put food on the table, but at the same time, some of the incentives that are given, in fact, end up, because it then outweighs the sort of limit, or it exceeds the limit, we then have, well, that actually in effect contributes to overfishing. And of course, we have the discarded bycatch habitat, and in other words, what's caught in the trawlers, what's caught in nets, the bycatch that's discarded, it's not used. Very large quantities of bycatch are discarded, and especially from the trawl fishery in Trinidad and Tobago, everyone knows it tends to wreak havoc. It's a bulldozer really at the bottom of the sea. And what it also traps is the undersized fish, or the larvae and juveniles of the very commercially important species. And we continue illegal fishing, that continues. There is also a lack of implementation and enforcement of regulations, things that we're very accustomed to in the Caribbean, where all of this really will contribute to the overall management. And of course, we're attempting to sustainably manage. So how do we deal with these issues given the current status? We need to sustainably feed a growing population. We need to reduce food waste, and we need to produce more food from the ocean. How can we do this? We can start by making personal choices. How did this most fed ocean species, the shark, become such a delicious treat in true Trini style, where it's fried and smothered in pineapple, shadow benny, tamarind and garlic sauce, and so on? But it is actually an overfished species. The shark is an overfished species. There's an estimated 273 million sharks killed annually. 100 million are harvested just for their fins. Just this morning, I saw in the UK's Guardian newspaper, there's an article again about the endangered and this business about shark fins. And remember, when you cut the shark fins off, you literally throw the animal, the other parts of the boat. Trinidad and Tobago, we have a lot to answer for. In addition to it being overfished, we are the largest exporter of shark fins to Hong Kong for shark fin soup. And these sharks are caught off the East Coast by longliners that tend to originate in the Far East, but they are actually shipped from our ports. Not a very nice thing to have on our list when we're talking about sustainable foods and sustainable methods. We therefore need to start thinking about when we're going to have something to eat from the sea. Should I be avoiding this? How was it caught? What is the method that was used to catch this? Is it overfished? Is it at the limit? These are key questions that we need to consider when we're making our personal choices, because this is what sustainability is. So at the same time, some of the fish and seafood that we're eating may contain harmful contaminants, and there's a fair amount of information available. The ministry's website, Fisheries Division, the Institute of Marine Affairs, Ministry of Agriculture, CARDI, CFTDI, various divisions where you can get this information. So,
sorry, one more minute.
Thank you. Slide 3, please. So there are alternatives, and there's very good information, for example, what sustainable foods are around. So we do have choices. We can be guided as what species we can eat and which ones we should not eat. Next slide, please. But really key to all of this is if we attempt to encourage our fishers or fishermen, which are the key stakeholders, how do we work with them towards the sustainable fishing practices? We need to encourage them to fish for other species, but at the same time, we need to develop and encourage new markets. On this point, I say kudos to the persons who have been responsible for teaching us to move towards eating lionfish. And at the same time, so we need to be engaging in these practices. There's a delicacy called with the cutlass fish. It's Dayu, it's a delicacy in China. And I think for a lot of us, we didn't realize what a valuable commodity this is. We need to extend then our fisheries. We need to encourage creativity and innovation by including job creation. The most important thing that we want is we can't say, we don't want you to fish this particular species, or we don't want you to eat this particular species. What we want to do is to encourage fishers we want to build capacity in communities. We want to engage in job creation. A lot of these species are treated and packaged off island. Why are we still using tinned salmon? Why are we still using tinned sardines? Why is we still, the previous speaker talked about reducing our import bill. Why are we importing these things? I have no doubt that we have some species locally in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean that we can substitute for. Some organizations are doing extremely well by training our fishers and our fisher folk in the processing. As you see on the slide, we can also encourage our fishers to move towards tourism and using their vessels for research, assisting us with science and monitoring and deep sea diving, snorkeling and so on. In other words, let us not infringe on their benefits. They are the main group. We need to encourage them. We need towards developing capacity, building capacity rather, and we need to show that there are a number of livelihood options that they can engage in. With that, I'm going to say thank you very much. And just to say that we have indeed begun to make the changes, but we need to continue to work together to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Govind. Sorry to cut you all, but time is tight. We want to allow time for questions later on. So I now invite Dr. Ladana Kanhai to address the topic, plastic pollution in the Caribbean, wider concern. Dr. Kanhai is a marine scientist who is currently based at the Department of Life Sciences at UWI in St. Augustine. Her research is multidisciplinary and it is focused on understanding human impact on species, communities, and ecosystems to advance the development of context-specific interventions that will contribute to the conservation of biodiversity. She has conducted research in Trinidad and Tobago, the Arctic Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and the Caribbean Sea. She represented Trinidad and Tobago on the UNEP Scientific Advisory Committee on Marine Litter and Microplastics 2019 to 2022. She's currently one of the lead authors on the Grenada National Ecosystem Assessment and has recently published on the issue of marine debris and plastic pollution in the Caribbean large marine ecosystem. Her latest research is focused on the human dimension of plastic pollution in Trinidad and Tobago. She serves as a member on several local, regional, and international working groups and committees that are focused on marine conservation and pollution. Dr. Kanhai, thanks for agreeing to participate in our webinar, and I invite you now to make your 10-minute presentation.
Thanks very much. I'm just about to share my screen. Can you all see it?
Yes, yes.
Have you shared it for me?
Yes, we'll share.
Okay, you guys shared it for me. All right, great. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. In the midst of everything that is going on right now, I'm sure that you all will agree with me when I say that the Caribbean is a beautiful place, and it's really a privilege for us to be able to call this place our home. And if I were to ask you, to name your favorite natural ecosystems, we can go to the other slide, to name your favorite natural ecosystems, many of you would say to me, the beaches. I might even get some people talking about mangrove swamps because they like to bird watch. Some people might even be saying that they like to go to Tobago to visit the coral reefs. So when we think about the Caribbean and the Caribbean large marine ecosystem, this is actually the most biodiverse region in the Western tropical Atlantic Ocean. And our natural ecosystems are really very important because they provide us with a number of services. You would have heard many of the other speakers speak about some of those services. So Professor Gobind just spoke about some of those provisioning services in the form of food. You would have heard about supporting services. So these ecosystems provide us with really important habitats for organisms that might spend all of their life there, or maybe they might migrate through those ecosystems, things like the iconic sea turtles and seabirds. And then, of course, you have other services. So some of these ecosystems, what they help us do is that they help us to trap or sequester carbon dioxide. And so they help us with the regulation of different things, climate being one of them. Okay, so next slide, please. So when we talk about the Caribbean, we're really talking about a shared space. We are connected. We are connected by many things. Some of those things, if we talk about it from the biophysical environment, would be things like the oceanic currents. So we've got oceanic currents. You're seeing them with the white arrows there. They bring substances into our region. Those substances can circulate within our region, and then some of those substances can actually be transported out of our region. We also have rivers, and what rivers are doing are that rivers are transporting, materials from the land to the coastal and the marine environment. Within the past couple of days, we've had the influx of Saharan dust, and so that's another way in which we're connected by the winds as well. And so when we are talking about this issue of pollution, we are really speaking about a transboundary issue. We are speaking about an issue whereby the waste that is generated in one country, that waste can potentially be transported to other countries. And then, of course, we also have the situation whereby waste that we don't generate can end up on our shores. So really, when we're talking about the issue of environmental pollution, it's everybody's business. Okay, next slide, please. So they asked me to talk about plastic pollution, quite happy to do so. Earlier this year, what we would have done is that we would have published an article whereby we reviewed data from 1980 to 2020 as it relates to this big issue of marine debris and microplastics. And what we found was that the issue of marine debris, it's not a new one. We actually have 4 decades of data in the Caribbean region. Now, when I say marine debris, plastic debris, of course, is just simply one component. But what we have data about is that, of course, plastics are accumulating in our natural ecosystems in different environmental compartments. What we know, of course, is that the oceanic currents are transporting the plastics. And of course, rivers are also important in the transport of those plastics. But what I think you want to hear from me is, well, why the concern, why the worry? Okay, so the next slide, please. When we think about plastic debris poses a threat to biodiversity, and it can do so in a couple of ways. So of course, it can pose a threat to the organisms. So we've got evidence that organisms are ingesting plastics, okay? And of course, when they ingest those plastics, that poses a threat to their health. Many people are more familiar with the physical effects. You will see, images of turtles being entangled in nets. You would see the prop roots of red mangrove being entangled with plastic debris. What we also have, of course, when we think about the effects of plastics on biodiversity, would be some of the ecological effects. Now, some plastics are less dense than seawater. And what that means, of course, is that they can float. So they can be transported by the oceanic currents. They can move from point A to point B. However, what happens is that sometimes organisms might hitch a ride on these plastics. And so what we potentially could have happening is that we could have the introduction of invasive alien species. Okay, so we're now thinking about plastics potentially having ecological effects. Many people are also familiar with the fact that plastics sometimes act as a sponge for chemicals. And so if there are pollutants in the environment, what can happen is that these plastics can absorb these chemicals. So of course, when organisms ingest them, you have problems. The next slide, please. So it would be remiss of me if I were to stop there. But what I also want us to consider is when we're thinking of the issue of plastic debris can affect many of the sectors that we depend upon. The image that you're seeing on the screen there, this is from a trash tag challenge, a group of our students in 2019. They visited Maracas Beach. And during that session, they were asked to collect any items that they found. And these were some of the items that they found, right? Those items are not items that are washing up on our shores. Those are actually items that are being deposited by beachgoers, right? So tourists do not want to come to dirty beaches. So we've got to think about impacts to our tourism, the fisheries. We all are very familiar with the fact that plastics can exacerbate the flooding situation. And of course, if they line around on the coast, they can collect seawater, act as a breeding ground for mosquitoes, okay? But plastics are simply, if we don't manage it well, on land, they will end up in our natural ecosystems. But plastics are simply one category of pollutants. So the next slide, please. When we think about other anthropogenic activities, so domestic activities, agricultural activities, industrial activities, all of those activities can potentially lead to the release of environmental pollutants. When I first started research, my research was focused on the Caroni Swamp, which is part of the Caroni River Basin. And what we were focused on in those early days would have been the chemical contaminants that would have been associated with things like oysters and catfish. Why did we choose these organisms? We chose those organisms because those are organisms that humans consume. And what we were finding is that these organisms had chemical contaminants in them, heavy metals, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, things that are carcinogenic, okay? So what we also need to be aware of is that when we engage in anthropogenic activities, when we release these pollutants into our natural ecosystems, we can have, of course, organisms taking up these pollutants. And then, of course, there's now that link to human health if people are eating those very organisms. Many of my colleagues in the Department of Life Sciences and in the Department of Chemistry have, in the past conducted research in this area, and they have shown that many organisms that we eat actually contain these chemical contaminants. But as I end, what I want to say to you is, and I'll never, speak to an audience and tell them that plastic pollution or environmental pollution is the biggest environmental issue of our times. But what I will say is this: in the context of a changing climate, if we want our natural ecosystems to be resilient, if we want to give them the best chance, we have to take action and we have to deal with all of these other anthropogenic stressors. Plastic pollution is simply one of them. Environmental pollutants, simply one of them. And so I'll end it here. Happy to take questions at the end. Yes, I'll hand it over back to the chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanhai. Yes, later we go into the Q&A. I now invite Dr. Gaius Eudoxie to address the topic linking food security to climate resilience. Dr. Gaius Eudoxie is a senior lecturer of soil science at UWI St. Augustine with responsibility for teaching and research in sustainable soil management. Additionally, he serves as Deputy Dean, Outreach and Internationalization at the Faculty of Food and Agriculture. He has over 20 years teaching and research experience in soil management. He's a member of several national and regional committees and has consulted across the Caribbean on sustainable soil and land management, composting, IWRM, and crop nutrition. He has coordinated and participated in regional projects aimed at assessing soil health, reducing vulnerability, increasing resilience, and enhancing adaptation to changing climate and its impacts on soil and water resources. Dr. Eudoxie is a Vice President of the Latin American Caribbean Regional Soil Partnership and co-chair of the Intergovernmental Working Group on Drought under the UNCCD. He serves as Science Advisor to the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management and coordinates IWRM capacity building in the Caribbean through Caribbean WaterNet. So, Dr. Eudoxie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair, for that very kind introduction. And let me also take this opportunity to acknowledge and compliment the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, as well as the Faculty of Food and Agriculture for hosting this very timely and important webinar. So I'm going to hopefully spend my time trying to provide, I guess, from where we started with our first few presenters, kind of coming back again to this issue of food security and thinking about food security from the perspective of building climate resilience within our region. So I would touch on, and probably not in any depth, having two presenters already touched on food security. I will speak to, again, regional ambitions just for providing context, speak to the climate paradigm, kind of see how that paradigm complements or so to speak, presents a nexus for us as well with food. And lastly, touch on an issue in terms of an approach, not necessarily specifying anything in detail, but simply speaking towards a particularly systems-based approach for how we could best address issues of food security within a changing climate. So our first two presenters touched on this very critical context for us. One being trying to understand food security and appreciate the fact that food security has different dimensions, it has different components. And if we only address particular components, which is generally what we speak of, a lot of the time we speak of a food availability and not necessarily focusing heavily on the other dimensions of access, utilization, and stability. And stability particularly relating to other stressors that affect that ability of being able to maintain a status of food security is very important as well. So I think once we appreciate that context, and I think it was well presented to us by our FAO representative, I think we could move forward from there. The other issue I think was presented by our ED for Kadi, which is our regional ambition. And it has taken us a very long time, and I was happy to see our ED present a timeline for us from where we have been decades ago, understanding the importance of ensuring regional food security to the point where, you know, in most recent times, our heads of government, through our CARICOM secretariat, have been able to ratify and have been able to endorse a position of reducing our a very high regional food import bill. So I think we are at a point where now we have moved from recognizing that issue to the point where we have committed ourselves to addressing it. So I think what I want to do in this particular presentation is to as well just share how that ambition could be manifested into something very implementable. So I will shift my focus, you know, and try to be both artistic and mathematical at the same time by trying to understand where we are. And just last week, I was at COP15 of the UNCCD in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. And I was part of the IWG on drought. And we did some presentations on drought in numbers. And it is clear that we are in some dire straits. And a lot of what is happening is obviously climate related. So it is clear that we are being exposed to significant risks associated with a changing environment. And that risk is something that we have to be able to assess, and we have to be able to understand how it is going to impact us with regards to our own food security. So I just pulled out some data here, specific for Trinidad and Tobago, just to show us that even within our own context, we have concerns and things for us to be cognizant about. We're seeing here, for instance, surface temperatures from the 1950s to the 2019, sorry. And we clearly see, for instance, the normal temperature given by that dashed line, and we can clearly see over that period of time, our mean decadal temperatures are increasing. Similarly, if we look at our mean, our seasonal rainfall totals, we can also see over the years that those seasonal rainfall totals in what is supposed to be our rainy season is progressively declining. Now, whether or not that is statistically significant, I'm not here to speak on that, but we can clearly see that there is a need for us to have some concern. Yeah? I wanted to draw an example for us. Recently, Indonesia indicated that they were going to halt the palm oil supplies. That created a tremendous issue on the availability of palm oil globally. And the issue was not necessarily simply because they indicated that they were going to reduce their exports. The issue came around because as well, other key exporting countries like Brazil and Canada for soybean and canola oil respectively suffered tremendous droughts in the 2021-2022 cropping season, leading to significant reductions in yield and hence the exportability. And what does that mean to us? That means that there is an issue that is brewing that we have to bear in mind that obviously has a strong link to our climate. Climate is going to have tremendous impact on our ability to be able to be food secure. And as I said, not only from the perspective here, which this slide is trying to show us from the dimension of availability, but also we have seen access from supply chain disruptions. I just explained with regards to the cooking oils. Yeah, and we know that there are other obviously global stressors that are adding to and creating complexity within that food system dynamics. But the reality is that we are going to see or experience greater impacts based on that climate paradigm, and it is something that we need to pay attention to. What is that food climate nexus trying to tell us? What elements must we pay attention to? You know, within the entire 4 components of our food security, what must we focus on? Certainly one of the issues we have to address from multiple angles is this business of food waste. You know, a significant amount, greater sometimes 1/3 of the food we produce ends up at waste. And not only is it being wasted, means that it's not going to use a useful cause. We are also, through the poor management of waste, contributing significantly to an exacerbated increasing climate change scenario. Another key critical issue for us is this business of land use. And I probably just gonna indicate very clearly that we do not have very good land use policy nor land use plans regionally, and that you always see I come back to that a little later without necessarily going into significant details. We must also think about our vulnerable groups. And I push that one in there particularly because it has been highlighted in some previous, by some previous panelists, but it is something that we should recognize as very cross-cutting and something that we need to focus on. The supply chain logistics, we understand that. The trade, we understand that. Our ED, and I am well present at some of those regional meetings. You know, I have seen items on agendas at those meetings, you know, for decades. So it's a very strange thing that we cannot recognize these are limitations and bottlenecks and restrictions to our ability to ensure that within the changing climate, we can ensure food security. And last but not least, and I think I want to say that we have a spotlight or a bright spot, you know, on the governance. Because, you know, it was very reassuring to read the CARICOM Secretariat's output of that heads of government meeting pertaining to the 25 by 2025. You know, it does say that our those with that authority are certainly making a concerted effort for us to address that issue. We certainly have obviously the need for more on-the-ground implementation plans, but at the policy level and the governance level, it is certainly reassuring.
Excuse me, Dr. Eudoxie, you have 1 minute left.
So we must also recognize that in addition to that, the region is highly exposed. As a Caribbean state, we are very, very highly exposed. And what does that mean? It also means that when it comes to our resilience is pretty low. And we have to understand that because we are very low resilience in our ability to bounce back, it takes us, for instance, we are stuck in this cycle of rebuilding after our climate-based impacts, such as storms. So it really means that there's a need for us to transition from what we see as developmental initiatives to certainly things that are more transformative. And how is that process of us? What is that process? What is that system thinking leading us to there? And I have here sustainability in bold. And the essence is that we need to recognize that there's a way in which we can do that. And one of the key targets, as seen not only by the UNCCD, but both by the UNFCCC and CBD, the importance of ensuring that land and appropriate land management becomes critical to how we address food and nutrition security. So what are some of those actions? As my penultimate slide, we have to address issues of land degradation in the region, water security in the region, agricultural diseases, food waste, food loss and waste, and certainly we have to strengthen our agricultural policy. You know, we have done it at regional level and we have the mandate. Now we have to take it to national level, and we have to make sure that when it's there national level, you know, we as the purveyors of our governments ensure that we can ensure that they implement those plans. So with that, I thank you so very much, and I turn back over to our chair.
Thank you, Dr. Eudoxie. So I thank all the panelists for your insightful presentations, each of which reflected a depth of understanding of the topics addressed. I will now pose to the panelists questions that you have. So if you wish to ask a question, we've got some statements in the chat, which my colleague Dominique will read. But first, let me ask if you have any questions. I'll direct the question to the appropriate panelists where possible. And due to our time constraints, I ask panelists to do your best to respond to each question in 2 minutes. So have we got any questions?
I'm seeing one from the chat, Leela.
Yes.
From Natasha Lee. How can we, 4-H, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Agriculture, come together to develop this area to a level that sees great progress beyond the basic garden and further into greater food security?
Okay, so who, which panelists would like to take that? Ministry of Education and Agriculture.
Chair, if you don't mind, I will probably provide some feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Eudoxie. Yes.
And let me thank Natasha very quickly for the question. Certainly, I think one of the opportunities that there is for us to collaborate and develop programs that not only engage our students at that level, particularly level of where 4-H operates, which is at the primary level, engage our students in that type of activity, which is, in my mind, more of a vocational and more of a pragmatic. But we might also think about ensuring that it is a key part of the curriculum at that level as well. I recall our regional body asking that we take a good look as to the levels of agriculture throughout our educational system and see whether or not there's opportunity for revitalizing agriculture through our education system. So there is certainly an opportunity for us to seek to have some better collaboration and outputs in terms of the systems that are available for agricultural education at those levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eudoxie. And we asked panelists, when you are answering a question, please remember to put on your camera so we can spotlight you to everybody. We're getting a few more comments in from the chat. Alberta, Joseph Alexander, thank you. She says, I believe agriculture or a related designation needs to be added to the curriculum of denominational schools. That's such a brilliant insight. Natasha Lee, once again, there has to be a deeper look into the change of curriculum. It must become more project-based. Anybody else has a question?
Natalie, yes, Mr. Hussain?
Yes, I just should point out here that that CARI and the FAO are actually in the process right now of doing some. We have signed a letter of agreement to establish some demonstration school gardens in several schools in Trinidad and one in Tobago. So we need to be continuous in terms of promoting agriculture in schools. Another thing that comes to mind when you speak about schools and you speak about agriculture and opportunity for farmers is the school feeding program. And I know in Trinidad and Tobago in particular, there's been a drive to incorporate more local produce in the school feeding program. So those are some opportunities when you link in agriculture and school and education. I know also in a few countries in the past, I'm not sure if it's happening now, but there was some move in the past to sort of remove agriculture from being a subject area. I'm not sure what's the position now, but that of course would be a backward step, and we need to reverse that to ensure that we have focus on agriculture. Linking agriculture to schools also brings to mind promoting and encouraging youth in agriculture. And we at CARI have been doing our little part in this, particularly when it comes to giving awards at the CARICOM level to the top performer at CXC over the past few years in terms of agriculture. So I agree with the person that we need to continue our drive to ensure that agriculture remains relevant on the school curriculum and to continue promoting agriculture and encouraging youths to get into agriculture. Another aspect that came to mind was the fact that if the position right now is that we import a lot of food and we need to change the taste of the population with regard to having a liking for local produce, one of the avenues is through that same schools. At a young age, we need to ensure that our young children acquire taste for the local stuff and not for the foreign stuff, not for apples and strawberries and all that, but for banana and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have another chat from Natalie Bibby. Predial larceny is such a huge issue for local farmers and can be something that discourages persons from going into such work. Are there any plans to address this locally? And that is such a critical issue. Well, great question. Thank you, Natalie Bibby.
I know at one time there was a predial larceny squad.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's still operational, but that was one measure the government would have had to tackle this issue of predial larceny.
I see they're back. I read in the paper that yes,
right. And
they're back. Mm-hmm.
And there are also incentives that are available to registered farmers, which would help you with securing your animals and securing the property, fencing and so on, animal pens and all that. So those are the two ways at the moment that are available to help you deal with the issue of predial larceny. Also, when you're speaking about animals, I'm actually a livestock scientist by training, so my mind always goes to animals. You could also take your own measures in terms of probably injecting these tagging, these electronic tags, the RFID chips into animals so that if they get stolen, you're able to still track it. And another way to try to tackle this issue of breeder larceny is that I mean, it's not always possible for all producers of food to be registered farmers. And not all persons who suffer from breeder larceny are commercial farmers and so on. Sometimes you have a little tree or 2 trees in your yard and somebody come and thief all your lime, which you would probably sell to somebody. But another way that we could probably try to deal with this breeder larceny is that if every person were to register as farmers and have some sort of way to trace the produce from each farm to determine where it goes in terms of different supermarkets or whatnot, we will be able to identify persons who are selling produce that they don't produce, you know? So that's another way.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Robertson, your hand was up. Did you have a question before we ask another? Mr. Robertson?
My hand was up. Sorry about that since the first question was asked.
Hey.
But it's okay. I think the questions are adequately answered. If we have a second round, I will come back.
Okay. Right. Okay. Do you want to share yours now, and then we have time for one more? Yeah.
Well, I wanted to speak about the involvement of the 4-H and the link or partnership between the Ministry of Education, Agriculture, the NSDSL, FAO, in terms of strengthening the school feeding program using 2 approaches. One is where we look at linking the small farmers to the school feeding as a market. And the second one is building the capacity of the schools to be able to engage the students in agricultural production using innovation and technology. And that is a program that is going on right now, where we have some support from the Mexican government. And we are incorporating our other partners like CADI and ICA to assist the farmers and the teachers with the capacity building in terms of how we roll out good agricultural practices to ensure that the farmers provide the kind of food, safe food for the school feeding program, and at the same time that the children in the school can actually identify with these commodities and can help themselves by producing and earning an income. It is not only for them to be producing and eating in school, but at the same time for them to see these innovations used in the production as opportunities for getting involved in agriculture. Also in the 4-H, we are currently negotiating with the leadership in the 4-H movement to provide some technical assistance to them to be able to reach out to more than half of the population of the 4-H to really stimulate young people into agriculture. So you will hear more about that one, the person who asked the question about 4-H.
Thank you.
With respect to breeder larceny, it is really a scourge across the region. And a lot of work has been done in terms of putting the necessary legislation in place. But we all have to agree that, and I like the point by my colleague there, that farmers themselves too have to take some responsibilities. And just like how we do it for our homes, because we recognize that our safety comes first, our investment must be given equal attention. And where possible, we need to be able to use innovation, technology, or in some cases, digitization. We perhaps may need to change the way we farm, where we can ensure the security and of our animals, of our crops, and at the same time being able to monitor using the electronics or digitization to be able to see what is happening at our farms even when we are not there. So that's why we as FAO are promoting the whole notion of transforming the agriculture. It cannot continue to be the same fragmented approach that we have been using for decades. It must be modernized in a way that will really create the kind of opportunities for our young people and that they feel safe when they make an investment, that they can reap the benefits of that investment. but it will call for some injection of financing in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson, for that really excellent.
It's 15 hours.
Sorry, and comprehensive answer. We have two more questions before we wrap up and pass it on to Darian Narayan for our vote of thanks. The first is coming from Simon Graham. We are a village council and would like to encourage women and youth to grow food. Can you advise who we can approach to pursue this initiative? And we're opening this up to anybody, any of our panelists. And the second question that we have is, we focus on food security of the general public. What about farmers themselves? Speaking as a farmer first, then a UE student, discussions of the increasing cost of productions with decreasing prices for produce are always unaddressed. How can we encourage new persons to engage in agriculture or task farmers to produce more, if at the end of the day profitability is non-existent? Great question. Thank you, Gabriel.
I don't know if I can probably address the last one.
Yes, thank you.
And it really calls for enterprise selection, not because our producers in most cases tend to produce what they see other farmers are producing, assuming that they are making money. What is required is proper production planning, looking at the seasonality, the varieties, or whether or not a technology can transform the crop that you are producing, giving it higher yields. So even though you produce when everyone else have the same commodity like tomatoes, you will have such production that the volume will be able to increase your income earning capacity. So for farmers to really make money, we are advocating that your choice or selection of enterprise is the first most important issue to be addressed. And then the technology you use for the production is also critical, because the way you manage pests and diseases in this situation of increasing difficulties with climate change also adds to your cost. So your system of production, the timing of your production, all of these issues, it goes back to your agricultural production strategies that are being taught in, I think, those courses in UE about production technologies and so on. So that is significantly important.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. And just one more question, which I think would be, I'm going to shoot across to Leela. On the point made by Prof. Gobbins' point regarding making personal choices, how can religious organizations help with this behavioral shift?
Yes, and I noticed Professor Gobbins is saying that it's an excellent suggestion. All religious communities really are about integral human development, which is what the Catholic Church is about. And to develop people, we need nutritious food. So really, religious communities really have to get on board. As it's been said here, NGOs, private sector, businesses, etc. We need, first of all, to educate people. And hopefully this session, the link that will go out, could be used to help educate people. We need to educate them about their responsibility to the environment, stop littering, throwing plastic, etc. But what they can do, how they can, like here at Archbishop's house, we're sharing seeds and cuttings, etc., and educating people about how they can grow their own food. Schools, we have 118 primary schools and 27 secondary schools in the Catholic Church. The Muslims, the Hindus, others have their own schools. So there's a lot that we can do, but let's educate, let's give examples of what people can do, in my view. And so religious communities must come on board, as must other NGOs and others. Okay, and Natalie, maybe I Am Movement is an NGO actively involved in land restoration. Yeah, and Kathleen Warner saying, my family owns a large acreage of abandoned estate. That's it. There's so many pieces of land that families have that they don't use. Let's find ways, particularly if we belong to religious communities, to use the land and not leave it abandoned. Okay, sorry, we must draw to a close at this moment, but thank you all. I'd like to thank you all for participating, for joining in this discussion. I'd like to hand over now to Darian Orion, who is, before I hand over to Darian, Mr. Robertson, did you want to say anything? I see you're here. So did you want to?
I just wanted to echo your sentiments there that food is too important an issue, as I open my statement by saying, to just leave it to the Ministry of Agriculture alone. It is everybody's business. And therefore, this partnership that we are encouraging with all stakeholders, be it the religious bodies, the private sector, government, the CSOs and NGOs, it is this time, if we have to get it right, it is the need for this kind of forging of this kind of partnership that we can really see. And instead of duplicating and replicating, we work together towards one common goal.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Robertson, I remember reading our Trade and Industry Minister, Honorable Paula Gopi-Schoon, who said last year, 5.7 billion TG dollars we spend on food, importing food, and 78 million of that is on luxury food like lobster and strawberries and all that. Good gosh, it's time we stand on our own two legs and encourage our people to buy local. There was a time in my youth when there was a buy local strategy, and you know, we need to go back to those days. I read also that the government is going to give parcels of land to about 200 youths to encourage them. I hope when they do that, they won't leave them in the lurch to deal with irrigation. I've been reading what the farmers have been saying. It's not just giving them the land. Who is going to help them set up the infrastructure? I hope all that will be taken into consideration. So yes, let's encourage our youth, but let's make sure we don't just dump them on a piece of land and let them get on with it. They'll need technical and other support. Okay, thank you, Darian. The floor is yours now.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks to, of course, all our panelists and for everyone for joining us here on this important discussion around food security. And, you know, some of the last comments that are being made there around the importance of having an understanding of our way forward and paving our way forward with regards to what we do with food in the Caribbean region is so essential. But there are some Caribbean countries who are, of course, leading the charge and doing well with being able to provide food for their populations. I mean, there are lessons to be learned from countries like Belize out there who are able to supply most of their population with food, etc. So hopefully CARICOM has a big part to play inside there as well and can bring all of this together. So let me say thank you to all our panelists who are on board and who have shared so much insight here. Firstly, thanks to Dr. Woody Vera, the Dean of the Faculty of Food and Agriculture, for his welcome remarks as well. Thanks to Archbishop Jason Gordon for sharing as well his remarks with us and his message, which was read by, of course, Ms. Leela Ramdeen. Thank you to Mr. Ansari Hossain, who's the Executive Director of CARDI, to Mr. Ruben Robinson, who is the Food and Agricultural Organization Representative for Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname, Dr. Lena Dempwolf, who is the Biodiversity Specialist of the Environmental Planning and Policy Division of the Ministry of Planning and Development. And I was so fascinated by that presentation because, of course, I'm also very keen on having a love and appreciation for bees as well. So I really appreciated that. Mr. Daryl Rampasad, President of the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago, and who provided an on-the-ground report as well as of what is happening out there with a lot of the farmers. Professor Judith Gobin, Head of Department of Life Sciences, the University of St. Augustine, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. Dr. Ladana Kanhai, the Marine Sciences Lecturer at the Department of Life Sciences and the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, who gave us, of course, some very important insight into the whole plastic pollution situation as well. And Dr. Gaius Eudoxy, Deputy Dean, Outreach and Internationalization, Faculty of Food and Agriculture at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And of course, a big thank you to our chair as well, and moderator, Ms. Leela Ramdeen, who did such an excellent job in moving from speaker to speaker, especially with such tight time deadlines as well. And we thank the speakers for keeping to that. And to all the participants as well, let me say a big thank you to you all for coming on board here, for sharing your questions, for sharing your passion, for being part of the discussion as well. The only way that we're really going to move towards a more food secure land and world and global society is, of course, by the layman and just the regular person across the board being very much involved in the process and raising their level of awareness and eradicating the ignorance around food security as well. That is so important. So this has indeed been a fruitful discussion, pun intended, fruitful discussion. Yes, and we've definitely planted some seeds here that can go a long way in educating the wider populace, and of course in sharing information to young people who might be coming up, but also to folks of all ages who might not be aware of what we need to do to really push forward to attain some level of food security within our region, and of course by extension our globe. A big thank you to the University of the West Indies and to the CCSJ AMMR team, especially our tech team and tech people on university side, and on CCSJ AMMR side, Dominique and Shannon. Thank you all as well. And thanks to everyone for tuning in and for being part of this. And hopefully we can have more discussions like this on the horizon and in the near future. Thank you all.
Can I just add to thank Josanne and Tiffany at the UEN. Thank you so much.